The evening had begun so quietly. Candlelight on white linen, the soft sound of silver against china. 5 people arranged around a table at Hartwell Cottage, as though nothing in the world were about to go wrong. Vivian Hartwell had dressed with care that evening, not because she wished to impress anyone, but because she had learned long ago that the armor a woman wears is often the difference between surviving a room and being undone by it. She had sat across from Lord Nicholas Pembroke, her fiancé of 6 weeks, a man who had once spoken to her about a book he had read twice, a man whose unguarded warmth in a library had made her believe, very specifically, that something real was possible. And she had listened to him speak. He had been explaining, in the measured tones of a man who believed he was managing a situation, why the match was a sensible one, why the arrangement suited all parties, why Philippa Hartwell's connection to the Pembroke name would be a benefit to both families. And then, in the middle of a sentence that had no business going anywhere near the truth, Lord Nicholas Pembroke said the wrong thing entirely. "I only wish," he said, with the particular misfortune of a man who believes he is being diplomatic, "that your cousin had said yes first." The table went quiet. Not the polite quiet of a pause between courses. The complete, airless quiet of a room in which everyone present has just understood that something irreversible has occurred. Lady Pembridge, seated to Nicholas's left, set down her wine-glass with the care of a woman who wished her hands to be occupied with something other than her son's collar. Mrs. Hartwell, at the head of the table, looked at the candelabra as though it had personally offended her. Philippa, Nicholas's intended, studied the white linen of the tablecloth with the focused attention of a woman reading scripture. And Vivienne looked at Nicholas. She did not look at him with fury. She did not look at him with tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, or with the trembling lip of a woman about to forgive what has just been said. She looked at him with the clear, steady attention of a woman counting very carefully to 3 and deciding what to do with what she had just heard. Then she placed her dessert fork on the edge of her plate with the precision of someone setting down a surgical instrument after use. She reached for her left hand. She removed the ring, not dramatically, not with a gesture designed for the room, but with the quiet efficiency of someone returning a borrowed book to its proper shelf. And she placed it on the tablecloth beside Nicholas's plate, where the candlelight caught it and held it. "Now ask her again," Vivienne said, in a voice of perfect pleasantness, as though she were suggesting he pass the salt. She folded her napkin, set it beside her plate, and said, "Please excuse me. I find I am rather tired this evening." She stood, and she walked out of the dining room, and they heard her footsteps on the stairs, steady and unhurried, until the sound of them disappeared entirely. Nicholas stared at the ring. It was still warm. His mother stared at him with an expression that contained multitudes, none of them charitable. Philippa continued to study the tablecloth. Mrs. Hartwell looked, for the first time all evening, at Nicholas directly, and then looked away again, as though the sight of him required more patience than she currently possessed. No one spoke for a very long time. The candles burned. It was past 10 o'clock when Lady Pembridge found her son in the library at Hartwell Cottage, where he had retreated after the household had dispersed with the particular efficiency of people who wished to be elsewhere. He was standing at the window with his back to the room, holding nothing, doing nothing, which Lady Pembridge recognized as a sign that he was in a state of severe internal reckoning. She did not announce herself. She sat in the chair nearest the fireplace, arranged her skirts, and said, "You are an idiot." Nicholas turned from the window. "Mother." "I am not finished," Lady Pembridge said. "You will stand there and listen to me, because I will say this once and I will not repeat myself. And if you interrupt, I will lose my patience entirely, and that will help neither of us." Nicholas closed his mouth. "The words themselves were bad enough," his mother said. "But the words are not the thing I am addressing. The words were simply the form the cowardice chose to take this evening. The cowardice is the thing I am addressing." She looked at him with the calm precision that he had inherited in a different register from her. "You have been frightened of that young woman since the evening in the Hartwell library, when you spoke to her about Defoe for 40 minutes, forgot there was anyone else in the room. I watched it happen. You have been frightened of what it means that you feel it. And so you have been performing the correct emotional distance of a man who has made a sensible arrangement. And this evening, when the performance became impossible to sustain, you said the most defensive thing available to you." Nicholas said nothing. "I am not going to assist you," Lady Pembridge continued. "I want to be very clear about that. I will not intercede with Mrs. Hartwell. I will not send notes to Vivienne on your behalf. And I will not offer you any guidance whatsoever until you understand the difference between what you said this evening and why you said it. When you understand why, you may come to me. Until then, you are entirely on your own." She stood, smoothed her skirts, and walked to the door. "Mother," Nicholas said. She paused. "I know why," he said. "No," Lady Pembridge said, without turning around. "You know what? That is not the same thing." And she left him there, in the library, with the fire burning low and the ring still in his coat pocket where he had put it when no one was watching, because he had not been able to leave it on the table. 3 days of silence came from Vivienne's household. Not the absence of communication that results from busy schedules, but the deliberate, structured silence of a woman who has decided what she is not prepared to do. On the 4th day, a note arrived at Pembroke Park, written in Vivienne's clear, unhurried hand, addressed to no one in particular, and therefore to everyone. She would not be receiving visitors for the foreseeable future. Nicholas read the note twice. Then he folded it and put it in the drawer of his writing desk, on top of a second note he had begun and not finished, in which he had written the words, "I owe you an explanation," and then stopped, because he did not yet have one that was honest. He began writing letters in the evenings, not letters he intended to send. He understood, in some practical corner of his mind, that letters were not the right instrument yet. That arriving at Vivienne's door with a written explanation before she had agreed to receive one would be another form of the same presumption. But the writing helped him think, and thinking was what he needed, because his mother had been right. He had known what he said, but he had not yet understood why, and the why was refusing to come easily. The first letter was 4 pages long and was mostly wrong. He burned it. The second was 2 pages and was more honest, but still insufficient. He kept it. By the 3rd week, there was a stack of letters on his writing desk, 7 of them, sealed and addressed to Miss Vivienne Hartwell, Hartwell Cottage, Berkshire. Each one an attempt to say, in careful handwriting, what he had not been able to say aloud at the dinner table or in any conversation since. He read them back sometimes in the evenings and found that they were, collectively, the most honest thing he had written in his life. He did not send them. He told himself it was because the time was not right. He did not examine, very carefully, whether this was true. 3 weeks after the dinner, on a November morning when the frost had not yet fully lifted from the lane between Hartwell Cottage and the eastern edge of Pembroke Park, Nicholas positioned himself on the road he knew Vivienne walked. He had not hidden himself. He was standing in plain sight, which he considered the minimum decent gesture available to him. When Vivienne came around the bend in the lane, her coat buttoned to the collar against the cold, she stopped and looked at him. She did not pretend not to see him. She did not change direction. She waited. "I owe you an apology," Nicholas said. "Yes," Vivian said. "You do." He had prepared for this moment. He had thought about it carefully, had constructed something that was genuine and specific, and not self-serving. He began to speak it, and he had managed perhaps 4 sentences when Vivian raised one hand very slightly. Not dismissively, but with the precision of a woman who has decided to be efficient. "Lord Pembroke," she said, "I understand that you are sorry for what you said. I believe that you are. An apology, however, addresses what was said. I am considerably more interested in why it was said. Those are 2 different conversations, and I am not prepared to have the second one as a substitute for the first simply because the first is easier." Nicholas stopped. "Can you tell me why?" she asked. He stood in the frost-bright lane, and the honest answer was that he could not yet. Not in a form that was complete enough to be worth saying. He knew the shape of it. He did not yet know how to say it without it sounding like an excuse dressed as an explanation. "No," he said. "Not yet." Vivienne looked at him for a moment, with an expression that was not cold precisely, but was the opposite of warm. The expression of a woman confirming something she had already suspected. Then she nodded once, as though he had answered a question she had been holding for 3 weeks. "When you can," she said. "I will listen." She resumed her walk. She had gone perhaps 20 yards when the carriage came around the bend, a hired vehicle moving at a pace that had no business on a narrow lane. The horses startled by something unseen, the whole apparatus lurching wide. Nicholas's horse, tied at the verge, threw its head and sidestepped. And Nicholas moved without thinking, placing himself in the horse between the line of the carriage and the place where Vivienne was standing. The carriage passed. The driver shouted something. The horses settled. Vivienne had not moved. She looked at Nicholas, and then at the space between where she'd been standing and where the carriage had passed, and then at Nicholas again. The look lasted 3 seconds, perhaps 4. It was not gratitude exactly. It was something more complicated than gratitude. The look of a woman revising a calculation she had believed was complete. Then she turned and walked on. Nicholas stood in the lane and watched her go, and did not call after her, because she had not asked him to. The Hartwell-Pembroke arrangement had been documented. Nicholas discovered this the following week, when he sat across from his solicitor, Mr. Alderton, in the offices on King Street and asked, with the careful neutrality of a man who has been rehearsing the question, what the process would be for formally dissolving the match. Mr. Alderton looked at him over the tops of his spectacles. "It requires written agreement from both families, my lord," Mr. Alderton said. "The arrangement was entered into by Mr. Hartwell Sr. before his death and formalized in correspondence with the late Earl. It cannot be dissolved unilaterally. You would need a signed document from Mrs. Hartwell, or from Miss Philippa Hartwell herself, if she is of age and willing, and the matter would need to be recorded properly." "And if Miss Hartwell were willing?" Nicholas asked. "Then the dissolution would be straightforward," Mr. Alderton said, with the tone of a man who was carefully not asking any of the questions that were occurring to him. Nicholas thanked him and left. He wrote to Philippa that evening, a brief, honest note that asked nothing of her and explained only that he did not wish to continue an arrangement that served neither of them. He did not mention Vivian. He did not need to. Meanwhile, Philippa Hartwell had been watching events with the specific discomfort of a woman who holds a key she has not yet offered. She had known, since the evening of the dinner, that she carried information Vivian did not have. information that changed the shape of what had happened at the table. She had held it because she was not certain it was hers to give. But the weight of holding it had been growing steadily for 3 weeks, and when Nicholas's note arrived, she read it twice, set it on her writing desk, and sent a note to Vivian suggesting tea. Vivian accepted. They met in Philippa's sitting room on a Thursday afternoon, with the fire built high against the November cold. The conversation moved through the ordinary channels of two women who know each other slightly. The weather, the assembly schedule, a book Philippa had been reading. Then Vivian set down her cup and said pleasantly, "You have something you wish to tell me." Philippa looked at her hands. "I am not certain I know how to begin." "Begin with what you know," Vivian said. "The rest will follow." What happened then was not quite a confession and not quite a revelation, but something in between. A woman carefully setting down a weight she had been carrying in the wrong direction. Philippa spoke in careful sentences, choosing her words with the precision of someone who understands that the truth, said badly, can do as much damage as a lie. She said that she was aware the match had never been what it appeared. She said that she had been watching Vivian since the dinner with something that was not quite guilt and not quite pity, but was uncomfortably close to both. She did not yet say everything, but her manner as she spoke, the way she paused before certain sentences, the way her eyes moved to the window rather than to Vivian's face at particular moments, communicated clearly that what she was offering was not the whole of what she held. At one point, they both reached for the same chair back at the same moment. Vivian rising to examine a book on the shelf behind it, Philippa standing to add coal to the fire. Their hands arrived at the wood simultaneously. Neither took hold. Neither moved away. They stood like that for 1 beat, 2 beats, 3. Not looking at each other, the small distance between their hands carrying the weight of everything that had not yet been said. And then Vivian withdrew her hand, and Philippa moved to the coal scuttle, and neither of them mentioned it. When Vivian left that afternoon, she walked home along the frost-bright lane with the knowledge that Philippa Hartwell was carrying something she had not yet offered. Something that sat behind every sentence she had spoken with the solidity of a fact waiting to be named. Vivian did not know what it was. She knew with certainty that it existed, and that when it came, it would change something. She did not know yet what. The letters arrived on a Wednesday morning, delivered to Hartwell Cottage by Lady Pembridge herself, who handed the bundle to the housemaid without ceremony and left without asking to be received. There were 7 of them, unsealed, tied with a piece of brown string. Beneath the string was a note in Lady Pembridge's handwriting that said only, "I believe these belong with their intended reader." Vivian took them to her desk. She read them in order, which was the only sensible way to read anything. The first was dated 3 days after the dinner, the last was dated the previous week. Each one was written in Nicholas Pembroke's careful, even hand, the hand of a man who was considerably better at writing than speaking, which she had known since the evening in the Hartwell library, when he had quoted Defoe from memory and then apologized for it, as though quoting literature were a social imposition. The letters said things he had not said aloud. They said them specifically, without ornament, in the language of a man who had spent 3 months writing in the evenings and burning the drafts that were insufficient and keeping the ones that were honest. They described, in accumulated detail across 7 letters, why the evening in the library had been the beginning of something he had not known how to manage. They described the specific moment, a Tuesday in August, a conversation about whether a novel could be both funny and true, when he had understood that he was in considerably more difficulty than he had admitted to himself. They described what he had felt at the dinner table when the ring came off his finger. And they described it plainly, without self-justification, as the consequence of his own cowardice. They did not ask for anything. That, Vivian thought, sitting very still at her desk with the last letter open in front of her, was the worst part. A letter that asked for forgiveness could be assessed on its merits. A letter that simply said the truth and asked for nothing in return was considerably harder to know what to do with. She sat at her desk for a long time after she finished reading. Then she moved to the window, the one that faced east, toward the direction of Pembroke Park, where the November light was already failing across the fields. She sat there until the light was gone entirely, and the room had grown dark around her. And she did not light a candle, and she did not move. She was furious. She was furious at two things that pointed in entirely opposite directions. She was furious at the worst thing he had said aloud at the dinner table, which had been cowardly and specific and had told her something true about the distance between what a man feels and what he is willing to admit to feeling. And she was furious at the best thing he had been saying in private for 3 months, which was every letter on her desk, and which told her something equally true about what he had actually felt and what it had cost him to understand it. These two furies did not resolve each other. They sat side by side in her chest like two fires burning in opposite directions, and she was not prepared to let either of them go simply because the other one existed. She sat at the window until the stars were out. Then she lit a candle, went to her writing desk, and sent a note to Philippa Hartwell asking if she might call. Vivian arrived at Philippa's sitting room on a Friday morning with the particular stillness of a woman who has made a decision about what she needs to know. She sat down, declined tea, and said, without preliminary, "I need you to tell me what you have been holding back." Philippa had been expecting this. She had, in fact, been expecting it since the afternoon of the tea. Since the moment their hands had both arrived at the chair back, and she had understood that Vivian was a woman who noticed everything. She folded her hands in her lap and said, "Yes, all right." "Begin with the arrangement," Vivian said. "Begin with whether you ever wanted it." "I did not," Philippa said simply. "Not for a single day. The arrangement was my father's doing entirely, made 2 years before he died, and I was not consulted. I was informed." She paused. "I want to be clear that I am not asking for sympathy. I am telling you what is true." "And your own situation?" Vivian asked. Philippa looked at her steadily. "There is a clergyman in Oxfordshire," she said. "We have been corresponding for 2 years. I am prepared to sign whatever document removes me from the Pembroke match. I have been prepared to sign it for some time. I was waiting for someone to ask me." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "And the dinner," she said. "What he said. Was it what it sounded like?" "No," Philippa said. "It was not." She chose her next words with the care of someone who understood their weight. "What he said was not longing for me, Vivian. I was there. I watched his face. What he said was what a frightened man says when the feeling he has been refusing to name becomes too large to manage. He said the most defensive thing available to him. He was not looking at me when he said it. He was not thinking about me at all." Vivienne received this without moving, without any change in her expression that Philippa could name. "Thank you," Vivienne said after a moment. "That is what I needed to know." She stood, put on her coat, and left. The lane outside was bright with cold and clear, the November sky the particular pale blue that belongs to mornings when the light has no warmth in it. Vivian walked with her hands in her coat pockets and her eyes on the road ahead. And she had been walking for perhaps 10 minutes when she became aware that someone had fallen into step beside her. She did not look at him immediately. They walked in silence for a long time, long enough that the cottage fell behind them and the lane opened out toward the fields, long enough that the silence had moved past awkward into something else entirely. Then Vivian stopped. She did not look at him when she asked the question. She looked at the road ahead, at the frost on the verge, at the pale sky above the elms. "The letters," she said. "Did they mean what they said?" Nicholas was quiet for one breath. "2. "Yes," he said. Vivian turned. She kissed him, brief, decided, unapologetic, the kiss of a woman who has made a calculation and acted on it with full knowledge of what she is doing. Then she turned back to the road and resumed walking. Nicholas stood still in the lane. He stood there for a moment that was long enough to be counted, long enough to be felt, and then he walked after her. She did not quicken her pace. The frost lay bright and undisturbed on either side of the lane, and neither of them spoke, and neither of them needed to. Philippa signed the formal document of withdrawal on the 1st of December in Mr. Alderton's offices on King Street, in the presence of her mother and Nicholas's solicitor, who recorded it with the careful efficiency of a man who had learned not to ask questions about the personal circumstances of formal agreements. The dissolution was properly recorded. The Hartwell-Pembroke arrangement, as it had existed in correspondence and in the understanding of two families, ceased to exist. Society's attention sharpened immediately. Everyone in Berkshire who had been present at the dinner 6 weeks earlier, and a number of people who had only heard about it secondhand but had formed strong opinions regardless, was now watching with the focused interest of people who understand that a story is not yet finished. The ring had come off the table publicly enough. What came next would also be public, or it would mean nothing. Lady Pembridge understood this perfectly. She had understood it, in fact, before Nicholas had finished explaining the situation to her in his library, because she had been managing the social architecture of Berkshire for 30 years, and she knew exactly what the moment required. What was required was an occasion. What was required was a room full of witnesses and the right invitation, delivered in the right way. She arrived at Hartwell Cottage on the 15th of December, in person, in the mid-afternoon, and she asked for Mrs. Hartwell, and was shown into the drawing room, the same drawing room where the candles had burned low 6 weeks earlier, where the ring had sat beside Nicholas's plate and the silence had been absolute. Mrs. Hartwell received her with the cautious courtesy of a woman who is not certain what is being offered. Lady Pembridge sat, declined refreshment, and produced an envelope from her coat. "The Christmas assembly at the Pembridge Arms," she said, "is the 23rd of December. I would very much like Miss Vivian Hartwell to attend as a guest of our family." She set the invitation on the table between them. "I am delivering this myself, Mrs. Hartwell, because I wished there to be no ambiguity about what it represents." Vivienne had come downstairs during the visit, and she stood now in the doorway of the drawing room. Lady Pembridge looked at her directly. She looked. "Miss Hartwell," she said. Vivienne crossed the room, picked up the invitation, and read it. She looked at Lady Pembridge with the clear, steady attention that her future mother-in-law had come to recognize as the register she used when she was deciding something important. "Thank you," Vivienne said. "I will attend." Lady Pembridge nodded once, stood, and took her leave with the efficiency of a woman who has accomplished what she came to accomplish. When the door had closed behind her, Mrs. Hartwell looked at her daughter with an expression that contained equal parts relief and apprehension. "Vivian," she said. "I know, Mama," Vivian said. She set the invitation on the mantelpiece and looked at it for a moment. "I know exactly what it means. That is why I said yes." The Pembridge Arms Assembly Room on the 23rd of December was everything a Berkshire Christmas assembly was supposed to be. The fire built high against the cold outside, the candles multiplied along the walls, the fiddles tuned and playing, the assembled population of the county arranged in the particular social geometry of a room where everyone knows everyone and everyone is watching everyone. The air smelled of pine boughs and warm punch and the particular anticipation of people who have been waiting for something to happen. They had all been there 6 weeks ago. They had not been there, most of them, at the Hartwell dinner table. But the story had traveled as stories do in Berkshire, with speed and precision, and there was not a person in the room who did not know about the ring. Vivienne arrived with her mother and stood near the east wall, wearing a deep blue dress that she had chosen with the same deliberate care with which she chose all armor. She was speaking to Mrs. Alderton when she became aware that the room had shifted slightly. The particular shift of a room in which people have begun paying attention to something specific. She did not turn immediately. When she did, Nicholas Pembroke was crossing the room toward her. He was not performing anything. That was the first thing she noticed. The absence of the social composure he usually wore in public. The managed ease that she had recognized in retrospect as a form of distance. He was not wearing that now. He walked across the assembly room with the directness of a man who has decided something and is following through. And the room, which had been watching, went very quiet. He stopped in front of her. He did not attempt wit. He did not attempt the polished social ease of a man who is managing a situation. He reached into his breast pocket, and for one moment she thought he was reaching for the ring. But what he produced was a folded document, which he held briefly and then returned to his pocket, because it was not for the room. It was for her, and she would see it later, and he needed her to know it existed. Then he spoke. "I wanted you from the beginning," Nicholas said. His voice was plain and even, the voice of a man who has stopped performing and started speaking. "From the evening in the library, when you told me that a novel could be both funny and true, and I realized I had never considered the question properly before. I wanted you, and I was frightened of it. And I said the most cowardly and foolish thing I have ever said in my life at your mother's dinner table. I have spent 3 months understanding why I said it. And I have spent 3 months doing what I should have done the day after I said it. And I am standing here in front of everyone who watched you take that ring off the table, because I wanted the asking to happen in the same room as the damage." He paused. "I am asking you now." The room was very still. Vivienne looked at him. She looked at him with the expression that his solicitor, who was, in fact, present, and had taken a small, involuntary step backward when Nicholas began speaking, had privately described as the most unnerving look he had encountered in 30 years of legal practice. The cold, precise, measuring look of a woman who is deciding something with full information and no sentimentality. It lasted long enough that Mrs. Hartwell, standing 6 feet away, held her breath. Then Vivienne said, "You had better not make me regret it." She gave him her hand. The room exhaled. Someone near the fireplace began to clap, and then several people joined them, and the fiddles resumed, and the ordinary noise of an assembly room reasserted itself around them. But none of that was the thing that mattered. What mattered was her hand in his, and the fact that she had not looked away. They came back to Hartwell Cottage late that evening, Vivienne and her mother, and Nicholas, who had been invited by Mrs. Hartwell with the quiet warmth of a woman who had been hoping for this outcome for considerably longer than she had admitted. The drawing-room fire had been banked low by the housemaid before they left. and someone had brought in fresh candles. And the room was warm and amber-lit and smelled of the pine boughs Mrs. Hartwell had arranged on the mantelpiece the week before. Mrs. Hartwell said good night with the tact of a woman who understood when she was not needed, and went upstairs. 2 chairs had been drawn close to the fire. Vivienne sat in one and Nicholas in the other, and his coat was over the back of hers before either of them had quite arranged themselves, which was the kind of small domestic accident that says more than a speech. Nicholas reached into his breast pocket. He had retrieved the ring from his desk at Pembroke Park the morning after the dinner, 6 weeks ago. Because he had not been able to leave it on the table, he had carried it since then in the same pocket. Not as a talisman, not as a performance, but because it was hers and it belonged with him until he could return it properly. He took her left hand, and he put the ring on her finger himself, in the low firelight, in the drawing room where she had taken it off, with no audience except the fire and the pine boughs and the evening settling quietly around them. Vivienne looked at the ring on her hand. She looked at it for a long moment. The same ring, the same hand, the same drawing room, and everything else entirely different. Then she looked at him. "You understand," she said, "that you will need to be considerably better at this than you have been." "I have been made thoroughly aware of that," Nicholas said. "By your mother," Vivienne said. "By several parties," Nicholas said. "My mother was the most efficient." Vivienne looked at the ring again. Something in her expression changed. Not the cold precision, not the surgical clarity she used when she was managing a situation, but something warmer and more unguarded. The expression of a woman who has stopped performing willingness and arrived at the real thing. She smiled, not the precise, measured smile she used in assembly rooms, but the real one, the one that reached her eyes and stayed there, the one that Nicholas had seen exactly twice before and had been writing letters about for 3 months. "The book," she said. "The one you read twice." "What was it?" "Defoe," Nicholas said. "Robinson Crusoe. I read it the first time when I was 12 and found it practical. I read it the second time last year and found it considerably sadder." "That is the correct response," Vivienne said. "To most things, actually." "I thought you might think so," Nicholas said. The fire burned down around them, the candles holding their light against the December dark outside the windows, the pine boughs casting their particular green scent into the warm air of the room. 2 chairs drawn close, his coat over hers on the chair back. The ring on her finger, put there by him, in this room, in front of the low firelight. She had not built on nothing, it turned out. She had built on accurate observation. He had wanted her, precisely and specifically, since a Tuesday in August when she had told him a novel could be both funny and true. The cowardice had been the obstacle. The obstacle was gone. The fire burned